Hello, everybody, and welcome to the How We Got Here podcast. This is Kristen and Kelly here. And today I am so very excited to introduce our guest, Randy Moore. Kelly knows Randy more than I do, but after doing a very extensive Google search on Randy, I'm like super impressed on just like all of the wonderful things that he's done in this world. Randy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Randy Moore, and I'm a social worker by training and also a musician. I think that music has been a really key part of my healing, and so I'm excited to kind of talk about that because I think it's important that we have outlets to help us process our experiences and our internal world. So, um, I am a proud owner of a English Springer Spaniel. That's kind of my best friend. You might hear him every now and then kind of mess around in the background, but he often on my podcast kind of chews on his bone or, does something to let people know that he's there. So, but that's kind of just like a brief about me. There's plenty more to share, but I'll let the conversation go where it is that it does go. So.
Well, I'm seeing all of the guitars on your wall. For those that are just listening and can't see, like there is a ton of guitars. And I don't know that much about music, but like you said that like music is something that's really healing for you. Like what does that mean? Like what is that?
So for me, and really since I was a small child, music has spoke to me in a way that I just get something out of it that I don't get in any other space. It's kind of like a meditation in a way, and I feel like when I play music, I get closer to myself. Um, and so that can look like, I call it pumping the well, where I just will sit with an instrument and play like piano or I'll play guitar. I'm actually doing a songwriting workshop this month, and I'm writing a song a week, and so a lot of it is about intuition. And sometimes when you're playing, singing, words will come up or emotions or feelings, and you're kind of like stitching them together. And a lot of times I've said that, writing a song is almost writing something to yourself in the future. And there's been so many times I've written something and I didn't understand it in the moment. And then I listened back to it a couple years later and it was like I needed it in that moment that I didn't even know yet. So, you know, I think meditative practice is important, mindfulness is important. And for me, I do that through music.
No, that makes perfect sense. You really had me there when you were talking about like writing something to your future, like your future self. Like I actually went to many years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a workshop and it was in the Bronx in New York. And it was a writing workshop, and I love writing. It's always been a passion of mine. And they did this exercise where it was like every day you started out with a fresh piece of paper, fresh pencil, pen, whatever, and you wrote whatever you needed to write and you shared it. And like that
Mm.
was really intimate for me because I remember when I submitted my like application to get there and you had to submit like 7 to 10 pieces. And I like went all over my stuff, was like, well, this one or this one. Like, I didn't know which one to pick because I wanted to be perfect. And they were like, scrap all that. We're going to go with like what you were feeling, what you were writing right this second, and we're all going to critique it. And in that moment, I was absolutely terrified, but I actually made some very good friends, like this guy Noah being one of them. Like, it's incredible how that vulnerability can not just like impact us, but other people as well.
Yeah, I think it like, as a social worker, obviously Brene Brown has a special place in my heart, and she
Mm.
talks about how connection and vulnerability really is the key to connection and to opening up ourselves to other people. It's a necessary part of building bridges to one another. And I think, music is just a great example of how we're able to do that.
I love that, Randy. And thanks, folks, for your patience. As the animals run amok in the background here of the podcast recording. But just so excited to have you on, Randy, and also excited to learn more about your story and your journey, because of course I only know like one version of you. So I love how you're amplifying connection and how music connects us. But on the flip side of that, I'm also curious to learn more about how you chose music or fell into music and use that and enjoy that as such, like not only a tool but an outlet for your mental health, and how that's really become a part of you, of Randy. And just curious to learn more about how little Randy found music.
Yeah, so it's funny, and I actually talked about this in one episode of the podcast of my podcast that I did. There's one song in particular from when I was quite young, and it was the original 1974 version of Dolly Parton's "I Will Always Love You" that my grandma, she had a little cassette recording and she would play it, and I remember being like really young and hearing it and thinking it was so beautiful and it spoke to me. And I didn't know why, but it was bringing up these emotions, these really deep emotions that I felt. And I would make her play it over and over again. And so, that's like one of my first memories. But, my grandma was a singer. And so she really pushed me in my early years to go into church and to sing and to express myself. And when I was young, I was quite a little all over the place, like hyperactive kid, but I was kind of introverted. But I wrote these little poems and and that was something that she did. So she really nurtured that in me. And I found that through poetry, through music, whether it was singing somebody else's song or singing my own, as I said at the top, I felt closer to my truth or the truth in some way. And I often say I don't believe in good or bad music. I just believe in honest and dishonest music. And, because anything can be good. Some of my favorite artists are like, by definition, not the greatest singer or, but they take what they have in their being and create something with their hands and their skills, and it's a testament to their story. And so, I've sought to do that in my adult life with music. But yeah, I would say that she really, nurtured that and kind of it just felt like a place that I could go to where I wasn't judged or I wasn't ostracized in some way like I was in other kind of ways I was when I was young. So
I definitely empathize with that feeling of a safe space, especially as a young adult, a young person of any age, any school aged person. I think Kristen and I talk about that a lot in our each of our stories and our journeys when we go to schools and speak to youth and young adults. And I think that safe spaces, I don't know, I currently work in a school, and I feel like when I pose that question, when I talk to youth who might be in an active crisis, they're like, "What are you talking about, Miss Madden? A safe space? I don't have one of those." And all of that to say, I just feel like in 2024, post COVID, that concept of a safe space has kind of been like lost, at least from what I've observed from the youth that I work with. And it's just beautiful to hear that you had that at such a young age. But on the other side of that coin, I'm noticing this kind of phenomenon, at least with again the middle schoolers and high schoolers here in upstate New York, that they don't have like a safe space or the, concept of a safe space, whether that's a physical or non-physical place. But curious to hear more like your thoughts on that, or at least how you established that and like kept that safe space throughout your life. Obviously, you're an adult now and you're still just as passionate about music.
yeah, well, it's funny because it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I think, and Kristen, something really resonated that you had shared with your own experience in a previous episode where you kind of talked or alluded to, you know, being young and or maybe it was Kelly. I can't quite remember, but being young and going to school and it being horrible and then going home and it being horrible. So when you're young, you don't have a place to turn. You don't. So for me, that was music, and that was a place that I could kind of go into myself. And I'm a person that has a very active and vivid internal world. And there are some people who have more of an external world and they really live in that space. Whereas for me, my internal world is really rich. I like to chase my thoughts. You know, obviously being on this podcast, I have my history with mental health, and I can also share that it is a double-edged sword because there were at times where, for me, creativity can also look like mania, where I'm chasing ideas and becoming obsessed with ideas and thoughts. And so, some doctors have said, well, that's not inherently a good thing. And some have said, like, well, kind of getting something out of it. So it's I think that's really the gray area, that also is when I reflect on if the question of like if I could get rid of my mental illness, would I? And I think the honest answer is I wouldn't. I'd always try to manage it better, but it's so integral to who I am as an individual and my emotions and how I access those emotions and the depth to which I can access those emotions, that to take that away would take a lot of good away, a lot of my gifts away. And so, I always try to reframe that for people when I have the opportunity, that the same place where our strife and our struggles are born out of is also where our gifts come from as well. And if we can just see that, then, we can stand inside that a little brighter, I think.
Well, I think like really similarly, what I've seen, at least in my recovery journey, is that when I am, let's say, well, right? Like I'm in like a good place. I'm like taking my medication. I'm like talking to the doctors. I'm going to therapy. I'm like doing all of the things. I like almost convince myself like, well, my writing is not good enough. Or like I can't like tap into something as easy as I could than when I am like in the darkness struggling. And like I would have this sort of like, I mean, I see it now as like a false narrative that like when I am not well, when I am off of my medication, when I am not taking like the therapeutic steps that I need to, I would always say to myself, well, you are much better creatively. But like it is like this very fine double-edged sword of like it's not that I can't be creative in this space right now, right? Like it's a different type of creativity. Is my understanding for me. And I can only speak for myself, right? And that like it's just interesting how like at least for me like my mind can like trick me into like going backwards when the reality is like I've written beautiful stuff in my recovery process, like almost probably more dynamic than it was before, because like of the versions that we are today versus 2 years ago or 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago. Do you find that like your work has changed over the years?
Definitely, I got sober a little over 500 days ago from alcohol, and that was a big thing in my recovery as well, because I recognized that there was something in my life that was not working, and I removed it to see you know, if it would help the problem that I was dealing with, my mental health. I realized that it didn't fix what I needed it to fix. And it was like, okay, that was disappointing. I've got more work to do. But it was new information that was really important. And, a lot of times when I get really creative, I take a step back and I say, okay, sometimes it is like a red flag, like that something might be going on, that I might be going into, a more quote unquote manic, hypomanic type episode. But I've written from the depths of depression as well. And so, it is different. I think I've learned that it is a processing of both states. And so, you know, sometimes it is hard to write when there's things are going great, but sometimes you can. And I find in those moments that I chase like my imagination more. I imagine a story that's not mine, and write about that, and that kind of is the direction I go. But for me, it's been really complicated because I was first diagnosed with what would be described as serious mental illness when I was 12, and started showing symptoms really when I was about 8. And I kept that to myself. Um, you know, I obviously was creative, but I remember a very specific time where I showed a poem that I had written to some adults. And it was like one of the first times that I experienced this where it was almost like a fascination, like, wow, this is interesting that a 10-year-old or 11-year-old or however old I was can write this, but like, also, what does this mean? Because it's dark. And, I was really pulling themes from, you know, like I didn't really know why I was choosing these things, but they were speaking to me and I just chased them. And so, um, but I think that for me, trying to identify with a specific illness has been, sorry about the noise, has been,
Oops, Randy, I think your audio went out. You're not muted on Zoom, but it just like dropped.
can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay. I don't know why it does that.
no worries.
But I was just saying that I've been diagnosed with many different illnesses over the years, and kind of as I've treated those in my journey, like some symptoms have come up and some have gone down, and so it looks like different illnesses. And so, for me, it's just easier to kind of say like I deal with serious mental illness, serious and persistent mental illness. I've had long stints in my life where I've been great and not needed medication. And then, there are times like now that I can't go without it. Like I don't even want to try, it's not for me. But yeah, so I don't know where we were going with that, but I all that's to say is that I think it can be an indicator with like creativity and writing, and like, where I'm at. And I kind of use that as a compass to find my way back to myself.
I love that. And as a fellow human, I live with a mood disorder. I identify with living with bipolar 2 disorder. And I really have a hard time viewing my mania as something, I don't want to say positive, but an opportunity to explore my thoughts. I think I just shut down because I'm so used to telling myself this is not normal. This is not okay. And I think I worked myself up a bit. There's a lot of layers there. We'll dive into it another time, but um, just really appreciate how you're reframing mania into something so natural, something to lean into, and something to explore as safely and as comfortably as you can. Um, so yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that, but also kind of want to shift gears a little bit, Randy. Something I was so excited to hear about when you accepted our invitation to the podcast was to hear more of course, as comfortable as you feel sharing, but to hear more about what it was like growing up in the South. We we are two folks who live in New York and Pennsylvania. Of course, have family members, maybe down south, but um, I think at least to a lot of our listeners and the folks in our orbit who will listen to this, they might not know what the climate is like down there in terms of mental health in general, mental health resources, mental health help, or even the conversation around it. And am just curious and really interested to hear more. I know we've connected one on one about it and had conversations, but I just think it's so important to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I will kind of go to the beginning, which is I was born in like rural South Carolina. My mom was a young mom. She was 19, and my dad was actually from Appalachia. So, during my childhood, my mom would kind of pack me up and send me to the mountains for a period of time to connect with that part of my family and my history. And so I've always had a deep connection to the mountains. But, especially because I didn't get to know my dad. My dad passed away when my mom was 8 months pregnant. And it was, a very tragic kind of circumstance. But that was kind of, I always consider that to be, in some ways, my first trauma because I was in the womb during that period as my mom grieved her husband, and the life that she had hoped for herself. And then, I came into the world, and um you don't really get to pick where you come, but I would say for the most part, it was it was an interesting upbringing. It was hard in that there were, it was one of the poorest counties in South Carolina. And so, as I've gotten older and left that part of the country, I realized the limited opportunity that I would have had if I stayed. I think I intuitively knew that I would never be able to do the things that I wanted to do in that environment, but I also did not connect with the environment in a lot of ways. For example, like this is something that I've had to deal with as an adult, but I went to a school called Robert E. Lee Academy, which was built as, a segregation academy. It was built explicitly for the reason of when they integrated schools in South Carolina that parents could send their children out of to a school that was outside of the school district. And in my county, there was one school district. So you either went to the one school district or you could go to this school. But, I was kind of born into like, I guess I was like the second generation of that because my mom and her sisters went to that school. It's built in the 60s. And that was not something that was explicitly talked about. Like it was, like there was no policy that said, you know, persons of color could not go to school with white persons, but at the end of the day, we were separated, and it was kind of like, you know, the only place that you interacted with people outside your race in this environment was at the grocery store. But you went to your church and where you all looked the same, and you went to school where you all looked the same. And as I was getting older, I started having questions about why that might be. And, that was one of the first indications, or, as a social worker, my journey really started with that question of like, why is this okay? Like, this doesn't feel okay. And I remember like my cousin who also went to the school, we were kind of close growing up, and she called me few years ago, and her son was about to start school, and she asked me, and she didn't say like outright like, do you think he shouldn't go to this school because of the fact that we're kept separate, but she was like, do you think it was kind of like the question that wasn't explicitly said, but she was like, "Do you think he should go here?" And I told her, "No, like I don't think that that's a good learning environment. I think it is an unrealistic expectation for a child to believe that they will never interact with somebody different than themselves, and it's setting them up for failure." I said, "You know what set us up for failure, and there's a lot of stuff we had to unlearn and deal with as adults that we otherwise." Could have dealt with if we had just been in an environment where there was more of a focus on like diversity and the difference of perspective you know, and I think they would have told you that, but it would have been a lie. And so I think that that's, one of the things that I've had to overcome. But the other thing is that being a queer person in the South, there was that sense of otherness that I felt from a very young age always kind of, in a lot of ways, made me connect with people who had been othered, people who had disabilities, or people who, were kind of overlooked. Those were the kids that I was friends with. And so, um, I think in a lot of ways, I've had to do a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Reconciliation, I guess, with the fact that there are some things that I'm very proud of about where I come from. I've really connect with Scots-Irish ancestry and the music that comes through those people, and the storytelling and the sense of humor and those things that I think are really important. But there are also things that I've had to reckon with that, I'm not proud of. And so, I try to be accountable where I can be. And I also recognize that when I come up short, because we're all going to have blind spots that we just can't see, but beyond, to just admit that you got it wrong and try to make it right and to move forward instead of doubling down. And that I did mean that you're taking it the wrong way. And so I think that that is, at least something that my youth taught me.
I mean, I can't even imagine growing up in an environment where like there's segregation, but that's not really labeled segregation. And it's like, you talked about like how, I love the term like diversity is our strength. And like
Mhm.
how we can like learn from one another and all of our own different experiences, and like lacking that kind of like set you back in a way. I mean, like you're thriving now from what I can tell, but it's like with that setback of like, okay, like this is something that I'm lacking, do you think that sort of like slingshotted you into social work? Like, do you think it was like, okay, like because I'm not getting this piece, I want to learn like all about it later on in life?
I think so. With social work, it was interesting because when I went to school, originally, I kind of tried a lot of different things, and I was interested in social justice. At the time when I was kind of picking my major, the Occupy Wall Street movement was really big. This was like 2010. Um, and, at the time, also Nikki Haley, who's running for president, was the governor of my state and was kind of this very vocal opponent to those protesters who were just trying to make a point to say, like, there is unfair wealth distribution in this country and we need to do something about it. And so that was like one of the first like instances where my eyes were opened. But I was kind of pursuing English because I liked writing, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I went and talked to a social work advisor at the School of Social Work at USC. And, she was like, yeah, you can do all of these things, but, you'll come out of this program with a skill set. And so to me, it was important that I was able to explore these ideas and these themes, and I was really good at it. I was really good at like For me, one of the things with mental illness that I'll just share is I found out much, much, much later in life that I have probably been on the autism spectrum the whole time, and I didn't know it, and so these things like the hyperactive focus and the intense, super focus that I'll get on things that looks like mania, also could be associated with autism as well. And so I found that I don't know exactly where I was going at this point. I was making a roundabout point to the fact that, you know, that these things are just inextricably linked into like a part of our story. And so yeah, I'll try to get my thought back on track on that. But yeah, so
No, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I also lose my train of thought constantly. Yeah, no. I also don't know what I want to do with my life. So I
yeah.
just have no clue. I know that I want to help people. I know that I love advocacy. I know that I love talking about reducing stigma. But I think at the end of the day, like, there's, at least from what I've heard with every person that we've had on our pod, like, there's always been this little thing that's like, you should do this, you should do this. And like, it's whether or not we choose to follow it. And I'm sure with your life experiences, like, there have been some people that you've worked with that you've been able to help along with your education.
Yeah, it was funny when I going back to my kind of family when I was in social work school and I was doing my bachelor's, I actually won undergraduate social work student of the year award for some work I did on LGBTQIA stuff. But it was, again, I think we've used this word a lot, a double-edged sword, because I couldn't invite members of my family to come see me get this award, even though I was the first person in my family who had gone to college. And not only went to college, I dropped out of high school after the ninth grade. So I, I kind of clawed my way back to like, it was one of those things where I was like, I'm going to prove all of you wrong because so many people looked at me as I wasted the opportunity that I had. And so I remember that day, like getting that award, and it was so bittersweet because, I couldn't celebrate with the people you know, who had made that opportunity possible for me, even if we don't agree on a lot of things, their sacrifices did get me to where I am today, and am thankful for that. But it's been, it can be a little lonely to not be able to share in or not feel like you're understood in the work that you do. I go home all the time, and every time I go home, my grandparents ask me like where I live and what I do, and I tell them, and they're like are silent because they don't know. I don't think they have a language to relate to like what it is that I do. Talk about like mental health advocacy for young people and like, doing federal policy advocacy in my day job. Like they're like, what? Like, so, but I think that in my adult life, at least one of my goals have been carving out a space, whether it be through friendships or relationships in other ways, where I can, I get excited about stuff. I get excited about my art. I get excited about my work. And I often will like want to share it with somebody and get their feedback. And so, I'm just looking for my partners in the world that I can like share those things with and who will encourage me to keep doing them as well. So
I love that, Randy. And I'll always nerd out about social work with
yeah.
with you. I'm one semester away from being a big kid social worker. I'm a baby social worker right now. At least that's what everyone says nicely and in a joking manner. No shade there, but um yeah, I love that we like organically fell in to mental health advocacy. Of course, that's where our paths crossed and how we met, but a common thread throughout our podcast and all of our episodes up until this point has been advocacy, and how all of these wonderful, beautiful folks who have joined us kind of fell into each of their perspective. I don't want to say fields, but arenas of advocacy. And I know you've held, you're doing social work at a macro level. You've held positions in your community organizing, and you worked for, oh my gosh, what's his name? Representative Mark.
Senator, yeah, Senator
Yeah,
Mark Warner.
Senator Mark Warner. Thank you. And all of that said, I'm just curious to hear more about how you ended up specifically in mental health advocacy, but also how you kind of found that strength that I think Kristen and I empathize with, that when you were ready and you sat down and you thought to yourself, like, I'm ready to share my story and a little bit about myself in my lived experience in order to make others, even if they're strangers, feel more comfortable and more heard. And so I guess that's kind of two questions. One, how did you find yourself in mental health advocacy? But also, two, when did you know that you were ready, to share your lived experience within your advocacy?
Yeah, well, I would love to say that I was just like always this like outgoing and you know that I just chased it down. And in some ways I did chase it down, but I was kind of unwilling in a lot of ways because I am naturally like the biggest introvert. I like, as I said at the top of the episode, I have a very I would say, and maybe people that know me best would describe it also as intense inner world where like there's just a lot going on. And, so for me, like public speaking makes me really nervous. Like the thing that I didn't realize, like with eye contact, is like even like sitting here talking with you all, like I actually have you pulled down so I can't see your faces because when eye contact will really throw me off, and where I'll be like, it's funny, you just find yourself like your mind wandering about it, like what does that mean? Or like maybe or ascribing like emotions to states that are not like what the person's feeling. It's just made up on my end. So like public speaking has never been like a super like great thing, but you know, the thing with social work and with mental health advocacy is that I've always found that for me, and I think part of, having an Aspie brain is that injustice and truth are like central and core to like, or addressing injustice, I should say, are central and core to who I am as a person. And like when things are not right, I, you know, it's like the thing that like annoys that you just can't ignore. Like it just goes off and off and off and it just bothers the hell out of you. So for me, like I've been blessed because each opportunity has led to the next one in a really beautiful way. And I always tell, like, especially young social workers that come into like interactions with, I make sure to tell them, like, you don't have to have it all planned out because believe me, like, even if you do, like, you're going to be thankful for the opportunities that you didn't get. Like at some point, you may not understand the whole road now, but you will eventually. The disappointments that those disappointments will make you who you will ultimately become, and you will be better and thankful for them. And so, you know, there was a brief period in my early 20s where I was very secretive about my mental health challenges. And during that time, I also was the healthiest that I had been, where I wasn't on medication. So much of what I was doing was I have to move beyond um like my teenage years and like what happened. I have to get away from that and then, you know, as I got to my mid-20s and started, my drinking started picking up and, partying, all the things you do, I realized that, okay, well, I'm actually like using these things to feel less or to, in some ways, get more out of a situation. So, the hardest thing about quitting drinking for me was the social aspect. Like, I didn't know how much I needed it to feel comfortable in a room of strangers and to feel like I could talk about myself and be like everybody else. And I would even say, like, but the problem was I would go home and I'd drink alone excessively. And, so I would often say I would drink with other people to make my in more, and then I would go home and drink alone because I realized I never would. And that ultimately like was what it came down to. So, in terms of finding myself in mental health, it's just for me, it's been really easy in some, not to say easy to tell my truth, but it just comes natural for me to be like, this is who I am. If you don't like me or you don't like this part of my story or it makes you uncomfortable or, you know, I've I would rather you show yourself now out, so that we don't have to deal with that because I have very little capacity for inauthenticity in my relationships. And so that, yeah, so that all of that's to say is, that kind of drives my interest and love of social work and mental health advocacy at least.
I mean, I really love how you talked about specifically like sort of like these little tweaks of like change of behavior, like, oh, this might not be working for me, or this is definitely working for me, or let me try this. And like, especially like the drinking thing, like I saw on Instagram today, it was White Claw. They came out with like non-alcoholic seltzers. And it says White Claw. And like this very well could be fake news. I didn't look it up or fact check it, but either way, like I just thought it was like really interesting. Kelly, can you fact check that? But I thought either way that like the normalization of sobriety is actually quite incredible. That I've actually seen kids in school say, well, I have a family history of substance use disorder, so I don't even want to like open that coconut. And I'm like, wow, that's like very insightful and very interesting because like I don't know, like people can go out and have fun without getting like completely hammered. Yes, Kelly said I am correct. That is a thing. The White Claw being non-alcoholic. And I don't know, I think it just makes things a little bit easier that you don't necessarily have to be a recovering alcoholic to stop drinking. You could just be like, this isn't good for me right now, or I'm taking a medication and this isn't like jiving with my medication, or I'm just taking a break and like nobody thinks about it really. At least the people that matter don't.
Yeah, and my hope is that since those exist, that we'll actually, because what I've found, and I think it's dependent on where you live, but sober culture is lacking at least in some aspects of where I live, and I think it's interesting in the spaces where there's like that mix, like where you go to the brewery and they have like the coffees on tap, and then also the seltzers and the kombucha, like. I do love that. That's not for everybody who's in recovery, obviously. So, I hope that we are seeing more of a normalization, and I think it's super. I've heard young people say like, I have a family history, and you know, I wish that I had been more like, I don't know, I had thought about that more when I was younger. Um, but my path rolled out the way it did. But I do hope to see that there's more of a culture of sobriety. And I think with people like us, you know, where we are young and like it just didn't seem like an option for so long to not drink. Like because everything that the whole world centered around alcohol. And you can really see it, like you really see it when you are removed from it. Like every ad, every time you go out to a place and they don't have anything for you, so you're kind of awkwardly like chewing on a straw or like just doing something to make yourself like, you know, like the worst thing you can do is just give
Wait, you cut out. Oh,
Oh no, the audio dropped, Randy.
me.
wait, you said the worst thing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So the worst thing is to like go and like they give you like a still water and you're like, this is so boring. Like everybody's having fun with their little drinks and it like give me some bubbles or something, you know. I
I
love a
love a
kombucha.
mocktail. I love
A
a
mocktail, yeah.
mocktail. I love a kombucha. I like give it to me. Like I live for that stuff. Because like my partner is not in recovery. Like he's just like chilling. And like him and his friends, they go to the bar and like when I feel comfortable, I go and I'll get myself like my silly little drink and enjoy myself. And a lot of people ask, they're like, "How do you do that? Like how do you like still have fun?" And I'm like, well, A, I drive myself, so I always have an out. Like if I ever feel uncomfortable, I'm bouncing. And B, it's because like I've gotten to know myself and I'm pretty freaking great. Like at least I feel that way right now. I might feel differently tomorrow, but I'm a good time. Um, Probably better than without the drink, in my opinion. I don't know if the opinion is different for others, but I think sobriety, whether you find yourself having like alcoholic or addict tendencies or not, like it could be something interesting to explore for anybody.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And I agree with your assessment, at least for myself too. Like I'm better as a clearer person. Like I think people enjoy me more as a clearer person. I, you know, one of the big reasons I quit drinking is because I was having some cognitive issues that were associated with my depression. And like, is this a part of alcohol or is it not? Like, the answer is more complicated than that. Like, it's just not that cut and dry. It definitely wasn't helping. But when I took it out the way, there was still like, okay, like there's like a depression that is causing like an actual challenge in my brain, hard for me to perform tasks through like my executive functions, like whether it's like planning in the future or initiating task or controlling my attention span, like all of these little things. And I was like, it's just not right. But as like I said, over 500 days now, I've gotten further and further away from alcohol. I feel closer and closer to myself and to, you know, I don't know if I'll ever be the same, but like I'm grateful for the version of myself I have today because it's one that I can live with. Like, and the other one I couldn't. Like, I just couldn't live like that. And I'd also done it. Like, I told myself, like, I've done my 20s. Like, I did all this stuff. Like, I had fun. I did college. I did all that stuff. Like, but I want more in my life. I want to make something that's mine, and I don't think that alcohol was really contributing anything to that. And to be honest, it was taken away from it. So, but that was my personal journey with it.
That is so funny. Sorry. Lydia, how dare you? Oh, wait for you, Kelly.
She's looking at me. Cut this out, Kristen. As the only person on the call not living in sobriety, I always find it so, I'm not going to say enlightening, like beautiful and also educational to myself to hear how you both are navigating the world on top of living with mental illness, on top of all of the other hats that you both wear. Um, I am a daughter of an alcoholic. My mom still attends meetings in different capacities. Have been lucky enough to grow up not knowing what it's like to grow up with her using. So have that common thread with you both, but also appreciate how both of you teach me things about what it's like to live in sobriety and how you both live to your fullest despite navigating the world in that way. But Randy, I really appreciate what you said. Like, I like this version of me better. I am a clearer version of Randy. I am more Randy as a sober person. And I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And as we wrap up here, I just want to just make sure that I ask you, where can the people listening find you? Where can they follow you? Do you have any upcoming projects that we can support? And just want to kind of give you the floor to share about how folks can stay up with you in your journey.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of music, if people are curious about that, I'm on Spotify. I'm on like all the streaming sites, but it's my first and middle name. So Randy Bryan, Bryan with a Y. And if you search that, there's like a link tree out there, and it's kind of a hub for all my like social links as well as the podcast, The Degrees of Freedom, a mental health journey. I don't really have a set schedule for how I'll record that. It's kind of like a lot of times I'll just have an idea and I'll be like, I'm gonna do that. And it's like a 2 hour processing session for me where I like, you know, get to reflect deeply on my mental health and or music because music's a big part of my podcast. And so, I really enjoy chasing those ideas of creativity and also using those opportunities to kind of, you know, tell my story and to connect with that part of my story. I'm always remembering things that I kind of forgot that happened, which maybe is better, but in some ways it's like, oh, that's kind of lurking underneath. It's nice to uncover that. But yeah, Randy Bryan Moore is my name. You can search that and it should bring you all the things from the internet. So
And we'll put all the links in the description so folks can stay in touch with you. And Randy, I just want to say again, I am so grateful our paths crossed in our past, but so grateful again that you could join us and just share like a little sprinkle of your life and your journey and all of your favorite things and your passions. And we're just so grateful that you could join us for an episode of How We Got Here. So thank you.
absolutely. I'm happy to share, and I just want to thank both of you and encourage you to keep doing this because even if you don't see those faces of the people who are going to benefit from it, like they're there and this exists for them. So thank you for doing it, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be a part of it.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Randy.